Now that you talked about package inserts, it's like, what are we seeing the trends at the FDA or the EMA in terms of acceptance of novel drug delivery systems? I mean, is there eagerness to adopt this, or is there risk averseness? I mean, what's your experience?
So I've not seen any. My personal reflections are I don't see any particular averseness to novel drug delivery systems. In fact, if you can demonstrate, again we go back to the word demonstrate, if you can demonstrate the added value, why this delivery system that is related to a particular active ingredient as a benefit to a patient over and above that you would get without this delivery system, then I think you're on pretty safe ground. I mean, you still have to do all the regular consultation about what you need to do and is it safe and have you done the studies, etc., etc. But certainly in the area of cancer, for example, where ASTRAZENECA is active, drug delivery is seen as one of the ways forward in the fight against cancer, and there's actually pull from the FDA to bring forward novel drug delivery. And so some of the examples that we saw earlier, the Lupron, I talked about Zoladex, and there are others, have got some of the breakthrough drug delivery systems in there. So I actually feel that the regulatory authorities will, if you demonstrate it, they'll pull you in.
Yeah, I would agree. I think they're almost, I think their only concern is if it's new and novel, is it safe? And if you can demonstrate the safety, then they're looking at the overall package of benefits that comes from the drug, which includes the delivery mechanism. I don't think they single out drug delivery mechanisms. I haven't seen any or heard of any evidence of that, and certainly it's not a factor in any of our discussions that the FDA won't like this delivery mechanism. As long as we can demonstrate that it's safe, it's back to what's the package of benefits. Mm-hmm. And that's where, and I mean, I've seen that change over the years. People used to come and say to me, we have this really neat delivery system. And my answer would be, oh, geez, isn't that interesting? So do a lot of people. Now what I get is, we have this delivery system that does this. And then I get excited. And I think the FDA takes the same approach, which is, what does it do?
No, Chris is exactly right. If you look at the example that we use at Sun, and it really, again, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at product or corporate assets or we're doing our own internal diligence, we spend a fair amount of time doing payer research and KOL research. And that research, and most if not all reviewers at the FDA are going to be physicians in the categories that we're in, oncology, ophthalmology, CNS, respiratory, and now dermatology with the acquisition of Taro a few years ago, and then more recently with DUSA at the end of last year. So you do this research, you set up your questionnaire. You set up with a team that you've got working with you. You set up your questionnaire as to what questions you want to ask of them with regard to the product or the technology you're looking to pursue. And first of all, the physicians in the KOL group will give you a sense as to what will fit in the medical community or what won't. You can't be guided as though that's sort of godsend, but a lot of times it'll give you a good breadth and a good understanding as to what to expect. And then very quickly take that same, that same assessment and look at the payer side of it and see from a pricing point of view, it's really going to make sense when you get it out into the marketplace. Is it going to be tier 2, tier 3? Is it going to be in a specialty tier above that and then come back down later? Or is it, in some cases, again, being, not in the example of, let's say, Allergan, because they've done, outstandingly in dermatology and ophthalmology, but if you've got much smaller products, some of the budgets that are used from some of the smaller dermatology products, payers will tell you, this is under the radar. I don't think you'll have any problem with this type of product going into this tier or that tier. So you can get a pretty good idea from doing this kind of market research if you're on the smaller scale of, and I say smaller scale in the tens of millions, maybe one day some of the other companies will be able to compare or match to some of the work that Allergan's done, because they've done quite well, and it's not because they just presented a few minutes ago, but we look at that as a benchmark in a number of areas from a positive growth point of view. But we use it really to our benefit, again, whether it's outside or internal. This amount of research and the depth of research and the questions that we ask and the questionnaires that we use come back and are very useful in product development.
We've heard the extremely interesting stories from Allergan about repurposing or reusing or changing the utility of sort of off-patent drugs. It's like at each of your companies, are you looking at those kinds of opportunities? It's like, are there areas that like significant areas that remain to be mined in this space?
So from my perspective, AstraZeneca is looking at it to some extent if it fits in our overall R&D and therapy area strategy. I mean, the obvious one is in oncology and repurposing cytotoxics. You know, Abraxane was a great example of 10 years ago where they changed the efficacy tolerability profile. I mean, that was done probably over 10 years ago and created a $1 billion drug. And I think you know, in oncology, which are very potent drugs and create a lot of systemic side effects, then there's the potential for novel drug delivery to minimize that. And efficacy of cytotoxics is usually limited by the amount of drug you can give systemically because of tolerability. So if you can address that by novel drug delivery, then I think there's lots of potential there. And I think it's not just repurposing drugs that are off patent. It might also be used in two other ways. One, repurposing drugs in your own portfolio. So novel delivery might open up new avenues that weren't available to you before. And I think the other thing that hasn't been said about novel drug delivery is that it has the opportunity to open up new spaces in biology for the discovery scientists to look for new targets, etc. So, you know, lymphatic delivery for targets associated with lipid metabolism, for example. You know, can we look in that area? We've talked about siRNA delivery and delivery to organelles within cells. I think that's a really exciting area. And if we can do that consistently, then looking at targets on the genome and attacking those, I think becomes more. It won't become rocket science for us. It will become something that's within our grasp. So, you know, we talk about life cycle management. It actually might be at the very beginning of life cycle management and not just at the end of the story.
Yeah, we're certainly doing it. We're in discussions right now with two companies in oncology who are doing exactly that. You know, taking, as you said, very difficult to use compounds, highly potent, lots of side effects, but through their delivery mechanisms, they seem to have found some answers to that. And I think we can't ever exclude the fact that, and we've done this, nifedipine, Adalat, which you guys had for years from a license from Bayer in the US, was a poster child for this. Started out as a 4 times a day drug, then it went for angina, then it went to twice a day for hypertension, then once a day in multiple formulations, and 20 years later, long after the original patents were gone, the delivery mechanisms provided quite a bit of protection. So we also look at that. But I think the point was made, life cycle management doesn't just happen at the end of the life cycle. Life cycle management starts day one because you have to keep thinking. And for us, drug delivery has always been a critical part of life cycle management. And repurposing old drugs is something, again, I won't say it's the core of what we do internally, but certainly a lot of what we do from a business development standpoint is looking at this sort of thing, and it can make quite a difference.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. We do the same thing primarily out of our Spark division. As I said, with the proprietary side of what we do in acquiring products or acquiring assets, you know, really I led what started early in the year 2012. It took a few months to really take some traction, but I guess I wound up leading and being accountable for this acquisition that took place with Deuce at the end of last year on November 6th, right up to 3:45 in the morning before a press release had to be issued at 7:30. So, you know, these are the kinds of stories that occur when you really want to get something done and want to get it completed on a proprietary side of, you know, building into an asset of your own company, something new, at least on the dermatology side, on the branded business and not generic. If you look at the other side, and I probably spend about 80 to 85% of my time on the buy side, if you will, or on the in-licensing or in-acquisition side. The other 15% is really more on the out-licensing or sell side. We do development on exactly the example that Simon mentioned, which is paclitaxel and nanodispersion. The respiratory side, we have, you know, we have Advair, or a very similarity to Advair at half the dose of both the components. both salmeterol and fluticasone. So you got half the dose, and you're getting the same efficacy across the board, better adverse event profile. We're doing it with baclofen in a grid system, and we're also doing some work in the ophthalmology area. These are all known molecules, off-patent molecules. I'll say it, they're generic molecules, although that's an area that I don't spend a lot of my time on, but they get into the specialty side of what we do. And the development of those into a new delivery system or a better delivery system that we can look at either marketing ourselves, and we're generally looking at emerging markets first because we've got a lot of this development going on in India. And we're into phase 2 and phase 3 with some of these programs in the United States where we don't have the commercial infrastructure. So we're either going to start to build some of that ourselves, and I say some of it being on the small side, whereas the larger aspect of that will come on the acquisition of commercial teams that are on CNS or commercial teams that are in oncology, and there's not a lot of those. So we look at what do you call it? Repositioning, repurposing, reprofiling. You know, it all means drug delivery in terms of drug development. But there is a fair amount of time spent on that, and largely because the company has been founded, up until about 16 to 17 years ago, the company had been founded around a lot of API and a lot of off-patent work. So that's really been brought into, with that continuing to build a lot of cash for the business, continues into how do we lifecycle management, how do we pipeline develop some of these molecules into better delivery systems.
Okay, thanks, James. Anyone in the audience have a question? It's like we're coming up to the last 10 minutes of the panel. If anyone has a question or wants to ask something, please let us know.
Hi. I want to go back to the discussion about KOL research and payer research. One of the criticisms I hear about that kind of research is it tells us how the market is today, the current condition and thinking. Physicians are not particularly forward-looking 5 years out, 7 years out, but that it takes us to get a drug through development into the marketplace. How do you guard against that in your research? How do you project forward that far to imagine what the marketplace is going to look like, what it's willing to accept and support at that time?
No, that's an excellent question, and I think a lot of that is based on the types of questions that you ask the physicians, what they think of the way the medical landscape is today. If you take a look, and I think we all know what's happened with a lot of these patent expirations, a lot of the movement toward, a lot of what we're here for is a lot of this life cycle management around products that have been off patent, have been a decent, maybe not superior, but surely not inferior, a decent way of treating a medical condition, that's here to stay. That's here to stay, and it may be here to stay a lot longer than people think. There's also going to be a lot of innovation. But the physicians are going to have a sense by the questions that you ask, and they're going to have a sense of what they know about the medical community as to what might be acceptable moving downstream. And we build that into the models that we have when we speak to them. So it's a great question. You can't say what's happening today in 2013, what's it going to be like when 5 to 7 years later you're out in the market. And that's about as far as we look out, except for the discovery side of the business and the new molecules they're developing. Whether it's life cycle management of off-patent molecules or it's something that's already been in the pipeline, we're really looking 3 to 5 years out, something that you can actually see or feel like you can see. Financial models, I feel like you can't see more than about 24 months out. But when you're talking about these kinds of questions, I think 3 to 5 years out is probably pretty fair.
Yeah, I mean, we find that physicians aren't necessarily, I mean, there are obviously exceptions and there are some people who think a lot about it, but they're not necessarily the best people to tell us how medicine is going to be practiced in 5 to 10 years. However, what they are good at is giving you a response which, pretty consistent over time. If you put scenarios out there and give them choices, then you get some valid information. So for us, often it's about what scenarios do we set up about the future to test against the physicians. And there I think we get good answers, but we typically don't ask, sort of broad panels of physicians, where do you think things are going? For that, we tend to go to very select physicians. But generally, if we give a broad panel of physicians a set of scenarios, and it's never just one, and say, in this scenario, how do you think you would respond? We get pretty good and pretty consistent responses. I mean, that's actually the surprising thing, is that if you ask 100 physicians that question, you start to see them really grouping according to their personality and their approach to medicine.
Yeah, Chris brings up a good point. And unless you ask the question and have the experience, you're not going to get an answer to the question, you won't have the experience. It's one of those intangible things that you come back with maybe more answers than you thought you would get out of the research. It's not just you alone, it's not you or 2 or 3 people. There's a small team, say 6 to 8 people, physicians on our team, product development people on the team, and you kind of sit there and go, aha, look at the answers they came back with. You know, we weren't really thinking about this, but now we kind of go into another, and you wouldn't have had that if you otherwise hadn't done the research. And these aren't really long-term, big, expensive, you know, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars. We're talking about maybe a few weeks' time, depending on the company that you work with, and there are different companies that do different things better or worse. But it isn't a really deeply engaged, really, you know, exorbitantly expensive activity that you get yourself into, and it can be very valuable and very meaningful for your development process.
Any other questions?
So, Jim, I think you, actually it was Simon, you said that you have to demonstrate the benefit of the drug delivery system conceptually. Mm-hmm. So, like, who in the organization does that? I think you touched upon how it's done, but is it commercial and marketing? I mean, you could say, oh, broadly, it's a business development function.
No, so it depends on the phase of where we are in the development process. So if it's something we want to use in a preclinical phase 1 phase, it's the scientists that you have to demonstrate the data, show me the data that's going to do what you say it's going to do. And then as we go forward through the process, we will then involve people in terms of people like payer evidence, commercial, the clinicians. So it's a multifunctional team who will get together and work out the type of data that needs to be demonstrated in the development program going forward. And that's a multifunctional team. So there's no one person per se. If it's an internal development, it will pretty much be internal, but with some outside help with KOLs, etc. But if it's an external co-development using an in-licensed delivery system, then we'll use the business development guys, but we'll also use the expertise that exists in the company who we're doing it with. So I think you have to demonstrate what the drug delivery does. The amount and to the extent of that depends on where you are in the development phase, and it could be a quick, simple rat experiment very early on, or it could be a huge phase 3 clinical trial later on. Depends where we are.
But if it's a device, does the concept come from the scientists? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Well,
yes, but it also comes from other people. We have to demonstrate. So don't look at it as a delivery device. We have to look at it as a medicine, as a product in its entirety, which consists of a delivery device and an API. Then you have to answer the questions as you would normally do. Well, what is it that differentiates this product from the others? Where's the value add? And if that comes from the delivery device, that then focus your mind in terms of the type of questions you need to ask and therefore answer in able to ask that question. So I don't think it's any one person who has to sit and think how we do that. I think it's part of the development strategy of how you take this forward. But I think what's important is that in that process you have to answer the question, what is differentiating about this? What makes a difference?
Exactly the same in my company, and I think the key point is no one sits there and says and thinks just about the device or the mechanism. It's product.
We may have time for one last question.
A question. The number 2 drug abuse issue in the United States today is prescription drug abuse. And I'd like to know the opinions of the panels where the drug delivery platform is moving to assist with this problem that's crushing the U.S.
Excellent question. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I see it in pain. I mean, I've talked to a number of people. We've looked at a number of things where there's a combination of repurposing older pain medications, but also reducing the potential for abuse. I mean, it is clearly recognized as an issue. To be honest, I don't see it in too many other areas. I don't have people coming to me with that as a selling point, but certainly it is a point in many discussions we have on pain medications.
Yeah, I will say that we are actively engaged in that area, as much with, well, they are RX products. They're older RX products, and as well as newer RX products, as rendering the delivery system, or having a delivery system rather, that is rendering the drug ineffective if it is tampered with in a certain way or going to be abused in a certain way. I'll just leave it at that. We are doing that actively ourselves within the Spark group within the company. There are other companies out there, and I know a few of them that are relatively early stage, that are trying to approach that directly themselves. So yes, it is being addressed.
Okay, well, I'd like to ask you to thank you as the audience for listening to us on this panel, and I'd like to ask you to thank this esteemed panel here for their contributions today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.